Jeff and CJ fight side by side. Kurtz grabs a gun and aims at Jeff, but before he can fire, Brian crashes in with a car again, missing wildly, but Lucas lies and tells him he looked totally badass this time. After the fight, CJ approaches Jeff not with a high five, but with a hug. The movie begins with a car racing down the road while police chase it. Then the story jumps back to what happened 24 hours earlier. Brian, who works as a forensic accountant, has just married Emily. He is now coaching Lucas, his new stepson, at a lacrosse game. Lucas plays badly, and the other boys are annoyed that Brian keeps putting him in. Feeling embarrassed, Lucas offers to sit out, but Brian encourages him. He tells Lucas that this could be his hero moment. Just like in movies where everything slows down, Lucas tries again, catches the ball, runs in slow motion, and gets knocked down hard. Later, Emily tells Brian that Lucas doesn't really like sports. He prefers dance. But Brian keeps trying to bond with him the only way he knows, like he used to do with his own dad. When Brian goes to check on Lucas, he finds him being bullied. Angry, Brian threatens the bullies, saying that if they hurt Lucas again, he'll beat them up. One boy acts tough, but Brian walks away, saying he has a dinner reservation. Lucas tells Brian not to worry about it because he gets bullied every day. When Brian tells Emily, she suggests talking to the principal. Brian says that will just make things worse and Lucas will be labeled a snitch. At work, Brian's boss asks him to fake numbers on a balance sheet. Brian refuses, so his boss fires him. That night, he tells Emily. She reminds him she can still go back to her old law firm and that he can stay home and bond with Lucas for a while. Brian isn't thrilled but agrees. The next morning, Lucas is home because teachers have a training day. Lucas says he's hungry, but Brian doesn't know how to cook and suggests intermittent fasting. Lucas just makes himself a sandwich. At the park, a woman named Leslie introduces Brian to her group, the Mama Mafia. They invite him to Chili's for drinks, but he says no. Then Brian's phone shows Lucas's GPS tracker alert. Lucas wandered off again. Brian finds Lucas and starts tossing a football with him. Lucas throws weakly, and Brian gets frustrated. Another dad nearby, Jeff, offers to help and ends up joining them. Jeff shows off and brings over his son, CJ, who seems nice until he catches a butterfly and eats it. Jeff says CJ often eats random things. Jeff says he used to be in the army and had a friend named Bree, who once used a severed enemy hand to defuse a bomb. Brian asks if Bree died in battle. Jeff says no, he was crushed by a Chipotle delivery van. Lucas asks if they can visit CJ's house. Brian agrees, even though Jeff's rough play with CJ looks a little too violent. Before going, Brian sends Emily their location and Jeff's number, just in case. At Jeff's house, Lucas sees a picture of Jeff in uniform. Jeff talks about his missions, describing dangerous and gruesome events like they're funny stories. Then he grabs what looks like a gun and points it at Brian, but it's just a sauce dispenser. Lucas is amazed by Jeff and says he's super cool and strong. Brian mutters that guys built like that never live long. Jeff then shares that his wife died a few months ago. Brian apologizes, but Jeff stays calm about it and says he moved to this town to start fresh. He used to work security and saved enough money to try staying home with CJ. Then Jeff asks Brian if his wife is dead. Brian says no, his wife is a lawyer, and he used to be a forensic accountant until he got fired. Curious about CJ's strange behavior, Brian asks Jeff for the boy's full name. Jeff replies, Christopher Jiff. Brian asks, like the peanut butter? Jeff nods and says his wife loved that brand so much she named their son after it. Suddenly, Lucas rushes in and tells Brian that a man is watching them. Jeff quickly tells the boys they're going to Buck E. Cheese for lunch. At the restaurant, Jeff explains to Brian that he likes him so much because the first time CJ met Brian's kid, CJ also met his own new best friend. Brian tells him that things are moving too fast and they should get to know each other first. While Brian is talking, Jeff tunes him out and notices a man in a leather jacket staring at them. Jeff grabs their game tickets, trades them for a super sock, fills it with coins, and heads to a back room. He knocks out the wrong man by accident before finding the real one. A brutal fight breaks out, and Jeff gains the upper hand. He punches the man and demands, "How did you find me?" The man passes out. Meanwhile, outside, Brian is forced to take a picture with a mascot for a promotion, which he clearly dislikes. When the pizza arrives, CJ looks confused and asks what it is. Brian and Lucas are shocked that CJ doesn't know what pizza is. Brian asks, "Did your father never take you out for pizza?" CJ replies casually, "Jeff isn't my father. He took me." Shocked, Brian decides to leave, but the hostess stops him because his wristband doesn't match CJ's. She asks CJ if he knows Brian. CJ answers, "I don't know any of these people." At that moment, Jeff charges at the mascot and chaos erupts as they all flee the restaurant. Outside, Brian demands to know why CJ said Jeff isn't his dad. Jeff calmly replies, "Because it's the truth." Suddenly, the man in the leather jacket bursts outside. Jeff tells Brian to get in the car as gunfire erupts. While Jeff drives, Brian yells, "Why are they trying to kill me?" Jeff answers, "Because they think you know." Brian shouts, "Know what?" Jeff tells the kids to put on their headphones and watch a movie. He then explains that the men are after CJ because he rescued the boy from dangerous people. On the highway, Brian spots an Amber Alert on a billboard showing Jeff's car. Jeff sighs and says, "Yours looks better than mine did." Brian demands Jeff pull over so he can call the police, but realizes he left his phone back at Buck E. Cheese. Emily then calls Jeff's phone after trying Brian's. Jeff answers excitedly and tells her Brian talks about her a lot. Emily, unaware the call is on speaker, says Jeff sounds cool and not like the weirdo Brian described. Before Brian can respond, he sees another car approaching and ends the call. Jeff loses the pursuers with evasive driving, but soon police cars begin chasing them until a black SUV rams a patrol vehicle. Ahead, they encounter the Mama Mafia, Leslie and her group of moms. Leslie sees the Amber Alert and tells the others to box in the car. Jeff sees Leslie and mutters that she's attractive and he's not sure if he can kill her. She orders her son to taste the pervert driver. Jeff rams their car, causing the boy to accidentally taste his own mother. Moments later, the black car chasing them is crushed by a truck. About an hour later, Jeff parks the car, but it rolls backward. Brian tells him to grab it, but Jeff shrugs and says he'll just steal another one since the car is now tagged in an Amber Alert. Brian insists on leaving, but Jeff warns that if he does, the men will come after Brian and his family. Finally, Jeff explains everything. After leaving the army, he got a security job at a top-secret facility. He didn't know who owned it or what happened inside. His job was just patrols and random drug tests. The only other person he ever saw was a bearded man who looked like Zach Galifianakis, so Jeff nicknamed him Zach. A few weeks earlier, a mysterious package arrived at the facility. Jeff didn't want to leave it outside, so he brought it inside. That's when he heard a noise behind one of the doors and found a boy who said his name was CJ. Brian urges Jeff to go to the police, but Jeff refuses. He explains that he already tried. He took CJ to the police, told them CJ wasn't his kid, and that he stole him because the boy was clearly someone else's child. But instead of helping, the police tried to arrest him, so now people are hunting them down. Meanwhile, the kids wander into a candy store and come out completely wired on sugar. At the same time, the black cars arrive in the area. The men have also taken Brian's cell phone and are using Lucas's GPS tracker to locate CJ. Lucas and CJ spot the men and start running. They eventually run into Lucas's bullies. This time, CJ steps in and easily takes the bullies down. Back with Brian, he asks Jeff if there's anything else he lied about besides his wife being dead and CJ being his son. Jeff hesitates, then admits that CJ's name isn't actually Christopher, and he doesn't even know what the boy's real name is. Suddenly, They see the black cars approaching. Jeff suggests stealing a car, but Brian refuses and runs off to save Lucas. Gunfire erupts as the men shoot at them. Brian reaches Lucas and CJ, who are hiding. Lucas panics and asks where Jeff is, since he's the one who can actually protect them. At that moment, a man approaches with a gun. Jeff appears out of nowhere and runs the man over with a car. They escape, but Brian can't figure out how the men keep tracking them. Then he realizes it's his phone. The men must be using its GPS. He tells Lucas to turn it off so they won't be found again. Lucas thanks CJ for helping him earlier. In the front of the car, Brian opens up to Jeff about not feeling like a good dad. Jeff disagrees, saying Brian is a good father because he protects his kid and Lucas clearly loves him, unlike CJ. Brian explains that he thought he'd have children in his 20s or 30s, but didn't. Then God put Emily in his life, someone he says is way out of his league. He says that when Lucas first called him Dad, it was the best feeling in the world. Still, he sometimes feels Lucas deserves a younger, cooler father. Jeff tells him he is cool and that he would have done anything to have a dad like Brian. Brian clears his throat and tells Jeff to take them somewhere off the grid. Jeff drives them to a retirement home and introduces his estranged father, Gordon, who abandoned him when he was 4. Gordon sees CJ and assumes he's Jeff's son. Jeff corrects him, but Gordon still seems unsure. Gordon admits he left Jeff at an orphanage because he didn't know how to take care of him after losing his wife. He says he kept tabs on Jeff over the years. Jeff looks at CJ and realizes how much the boy resembles him, slowly concluding that CJ might actually be his son. Brian asks if Jeff knows who the mother could be. Jeff awkwardly admits he doesn't, saying he slept around a lot. Excited, Jeff turns to CJ and says they'll be a great team. Then Jeff tells Gordon he's in trouble and asks him to watch the kids. Gordon refuses. Back in the car, Brian tells Jeff they need to find out why someone would take his child and lock him up. Jeff says he has no idea why anyone would want a kid from him, pointing at Gordon as an example. He explains that this is why he joined the army, to find a sense of family, but even then he says he failed. He remembers refusing to shoot a child suicide bomber. His commander, Kurtz, was disappointed but still called him his perfect soldier. Jeff says, he had my back. Brian answers, that's what it's all about, letting them know we've got their backs. Later at lunch, Brian notices Jeff and CJ eating in perfect synchronization. Curious, Brian asks if Jeff remembers anyone else from the top secret facility. Jeff suddenly remembers Zach. Brian asks how they can find him. Jeff suggests using a dating app, since Zach used to ask him for help with his profiles. Jeff creates a fake account and messages Zach, but Zach thinks it's a bot and blocks him. So Brian uses Emily's photo instead. Pretending to be her, he messages Zach. After some flirty exchanges, Zach agrees to meet Emily in a hotel room. When Zach arrives, Jeff ambushes him and ties him up. Jeff demands to know why they kidnapped CJ and locked him in the facility. Zach refuses to talk, so Jeff threatens to waterboard him, just cold water poured on his head. Zach still doesn't say anything. Brian tries a new approach, threatening him with a cosmetic travel kit. Zach laughs and says nothing will make him talk. Brian then throws a wad of cash on the table. Immediately, Zach gives in. He reveals that CJ isn't Jeff's biological son. He's a clone of Jeff. CJ's full name, Zach explains, actually stands for Clone Jeff. He tells them CJ is stronger and smarter than Jeff. Brian asks Zach why he would clone Jeff. Zach panics and says he didn't clone anyone, he was only a babysitter. When Brian and Jeff demand to know who is really behind it, Zach refuses. Jeff picks up the lamp, ready to swing. Terrified, Zach blurts out the name, Simon Maddox. Brian quickly searches Simon Maddox on Jeff's phone and finds out he's a billionaire tech mogul from Silicon Valley. Suddenly, Brian gets a call from Emily. He answers, but there's only heavy breathing. Then a live video feed pops up on his screen, Emily at home, putting away groceries. A man's voice warns that she will be harmed unless Brian hands over CJ. The caller texts him coordinates and orders Brian to drive there. In the car, Jeff praises Brian for identifying Simon so quickly. Jeff thanks him for the earlier pep talk and admits he's starting to feel bonded with CJ. "I'm going to be the best dad," he says quietly. They arrive at a vast empty clearing. Moments later, several black cars surround them. Brian tells Lucas to get back into the SUV. Then he turns to Jeff and apologizes, explaining he brought them here because the men threatened to kill Emily. Simon steps out while his henchman grabs CJ. Jeff begs to say goodbye, but Simon sneers that CJ isn't capable of emotional attachment. Jeff calls it ridiculous and tells CJ that he loves him and will find him. "Do you feel anything at all?" Jeff asks. "No," CJ replies. Jeff raises a hand for a high five, but CJ walks away. As they drag CJ into a car, Lucas runs forward, gives CJ his hoodie, and hugs him tightly. One of Simon's men aims his gun at Jeff. Panicking, Brian stomps on the gas, eyes closed, trying to hit the gunman, but completely misses. He asks Lucas if he at least looked cool doing it. Lucas shakes his head. Brian sighs that he's not badass or cool. Lucas smiles and says he loves him the way he is. Brian urges Jeff that they need to save CJ. Jeff says it's useless. CJ probably doesn't even want rescuing. Just then, a ping sounds from the man's jacket. Jeff finds Brian's phone inside. Brian asks Lucas where the tracker is. Lucas says it's in the hoodie, the one he gave CJ. Brian groans that he thought Lucas turned it off. "I did," Lucas says. CJ must have turned it back on. With CJ trackable again, they follow the signal to Jeff's old workplace. When they arrive, Brian leaves Lucas in the car for safety. He and Jeff sneak inside. Brian clumsily climbs the gate while Jeff casually opens it. Inside, they split up. Brian finds CJ, but Jeff encounters something worse, another Jeff. The clones swarm him. He fights two of them, taking them down, but more pour in. They run toward an exit, but the door seals shut. An invisible barrier stops the clones from reaching them, but eventually the henchmen capture Jeff. Jeff punches one of them, giving Brian time to escape. The henchmen drag Jeff to Simon, and standing next to him is Colonel Kurtz, Jeff's former commanding officer. Kurtz greets Jeff fondly, saying he always liked him but hated his flaw, empathy. Kurtz says Jeff was one of many soldiers who failed their country. That's why he turned to cloning. Using DNA collected from Jeff during random drug tests, Kurtz and Simon used Jeff's physical traits and engineered complete obedience. The clones never tire, never question, never feel. Kurtz hands CJ a crossbow and orders him to kill Jeff. Jeff looks him in the eyes and tells him he's not a weapon, that they're the same. CJ hesitates, then spins and shoots Simon instead. Chaos erupts. Jeff and CJ fight side by side. Kurtz grabs a gun and aims at Jeff, but before he can fire, Brian crashes in with a car again, missing wildly, but Lucas lies and tells him he looked totally badass this time. After the fight, CJ approaches Jeff not with a high five, but with a hug. They escape as Jeff detonates explosives, destroying the entire facility. Weeks later, Jeff appears at Brian's house. Brian opens the door. Jeff casually says someone set fire to his home. Brian asks if it was Simon's men. Jeff shakes his head. "Nah," he says. "Different bad guys this time. But don't worry, I'll fill you in."